Eddas Technologies has brought us the ASGARD. Fiction no longer. I bet Odin wishes this was his destroyer. And bloody hell, it's big. As you can see, it's about New Gundam height, but the height on its own really doesn't cover it. The width and thickness is another level, only really comparable to the Saber. But that's not even including its backpack. Once you factor that in, this is a lot of shelf space taken up. But is it worth the space? When this was first announced and all we had to go on were renders, I was completely not sold on the colour scheme. But now that it's finalised and in hand, it's actually pretty okay. It is in the tried and true third-party colour scheme of white and blue. The gold on it works so much better now that it is actually a proper gold and not a weird mustard colour like the renders showed. The gold does so much work, giving it a distinct identity. I'm still not completely sold on the colour scheme. This big chunky design with big prominent radiator fins just doesn't suit the standard Gundam good guy look that they've gone with. To me it just screams a more industrial, dirty, more militaristic, slightly sinister colour scheme. So I 100% plan to paint it after the review. I'm just still deciding whether to change the white into a kind of primer grey or darker grey, like I used on this Supernova Heavy Arms that I did years ago. But the blue and white isn't the only colour scheme you get with it out of the box, anyway. Instead of the blue, if you want, you can entirely replace it with a neon bright orange if you prefer. On the runners, I was very sceptical of the orange. If I wasn't reviewing it, I probably would have never looked at it twice. But I'm glad I am, and I'm glad that I did. Replacing the blue pieces on the main body for the orange parts has given it a very different vibe. Just on its own, this has given it that slight little bit of edge that I felt it was missing with the standard white and blue colour scheme. And the orange really pops on a shelf. That's not your only option though. If you also don't like the gold, you get plain plastic yellow runners for all of the gold pieces too. I don't imagine they'll be anyone's choice just out of box, but the big benefit is that they're unplated. They're just the bare plastic. So if you do want to paint them and go for a different colour scheme, like I do, you don't have to worry about stripping the existing paint, which is great, not just for the effort that it saves you, but also in how it lowers the commitment needed to try a different colour scheme. I think I'm going to paint a lot of the gold pieces a dark silver, but I'm not 100% sure that it will look better. I really like the gold as it is. And this way, I don't have to sacrifice that gold. I can just paint these other runners and still switch it back to gold if I do a shit job, or if I ever just decide that it looked better or I want a different look. Just like so many other third-party kits, the ASGARD comes with metal parts for the frame. Not a full metal frame like the Sentinel, just some metal parts for the joints. And also, surprisingly and thankfully, soles of the feet, to give it a little bit of a lower centre of gravity and put some more of the weight at the bottom. Be aware, some of the metal parts also require screws, in case that's a deal breaker for you. It does come with the screwdriver, which is nice. Saves you the bother of getting into the kit and starting it and then suddenly finding you need a screwdriver and having to go and find one. But you will still have some bother because the screws themselves are just in a random bag with some runners. The only screws that posed any kind of issue were in the knees. Getting the centre screw to actually catch onto the grooves and actually start screwing in was quite difficult and took a fair while. And then when I first got the whole kit together, the knees, for me, were incredibly loose. I couldn't trust it to stand on its own at all. I always had to make sure it was in front of something, able to lean on it slightly. And I had thought that was because of the lower peg that was far too tight. You can see here how it looked after I tried just pushing it together and had to take it apart. The metal piece that goes on that peg had scraped the surface of the peg all to buggery, and so I then sanded it down quite heavily. And so I thought it was that sanding that had caused the knees to be far too loose in the end, that I had overdone it. But just to be safe, I tightened that centre screw just because it's the easy one to get to when it is all together, and it has been okay since. And so just beware that you might have to tighten it similarly. I would still recommend doing it basically the same way I did, wherein you tighten that screw tight like I initially did, but not as tight as it'll go. You always want to make sure you can unscrew it, get it all together, and then if it's loose, tighten it however much you need to. Don't just max tightness at the first opportunity. I'm so glad it did tighten up though, because I really wasn't looking forward to filming the whole review and all of the poses and everything with the knees that loose and having to always support it and make sure it was leaning against something and everything that whole time. They've also done a decent job with the details and colour separation. The armour comes in both white and very light grey, with plenty of inner frame visibly poking through, in keeping with modern master grade tradition. The metal parts even create some nice colour separation in the joints. One of my favourite parts is the waist. The colour separated piping just looks great. I love piping like that. And the kit uniquely has a lot of cameras all over it. Of course, most obviously on the chest, but also on the top of the shoulders, even the biceps for some reason. None of them are using clear parts, however, which is a little bit of a shame, but I personally always just use the stickers anyway. The kit does have clear parts, and in some fairly unusual places. The bottom of the shins and the sides of the miniguns both have large clear pieces, to make them just that little bit more visible. But yes, you heard that right, miniguns. They attach to the back of the forearms. I've also been able to get them to attach to the front, but it's a little bit looser. I don't think they're supposed to, but they will stay there, at least in some poses, which I found very helpful. They have an expanding gimmick that lets the barrel come forward and reveals underneath a gold piece that shows the ammo cartridges, which is pretty cool. It's just a shame that it's underneath for some reason. The miniguns also have a magazine that you can have either in the blue or orange, but the ones in the miniguns are a little bit loose and floppy. The backpack cannons similarly also have a somewhat similar expanding gimmick, allowing the barrels to open up and expand and causing the back to extend and pull out and reveal more internal mechanics. It's fairly stiff, but with how it's designed, there's multiple ways to make it easier to open it up. You can pull on the back, or you can push the two gun barrels backwards in order to open them up instead. Instead of the canisters, there's a separate piece you can put into the cannons that I have no idea the purpose of. It looks like a connector, like it would join the cannons to something else, but I don't know what, and it's not mentioned in the instructions. Maybe it's obvious, maybe it's just supposed to be a hole filler, I'm not sure. You can see the backpack as a whole also has a good amount of detail, with the frame showing through and a second cockpit up there at the top covered by a clear piece. No pilot figure unfortunately, same as in the main body. It has a more standard Gundam cockpit, but it is also empty and doesn't even really have a seat. I'm not sure if it is actually supposed to be a cockpit in their lore or not. It kind of looks more like a processing centre or something. The big white things at the top of the backpack are two additional subarms, which can expand and be brought forward and move about in all sorts of ways in order to, well, you know, do arm things and grab things. And then the kit also has two more subarms on the front skirts. There is one more body-mounted weapon. The top of the shoulders can open up, revealing missiles. Out of box, they are colour separated in a lighter grey than the surrounding grey, but here I've painted them in my standard metallic red missile colour, to make them a bit more visible, as they blended in a little bit too much out of box for me. I painted a few more bits and bobs as well, just quickly, small parts that were easy enough to paint and that I knew what colours I wanted to make them, just to give more variation for the review, instead of saving all of my painting for after the review and maybe making another video on it once it's fully painted. For handheld weapons, the kit of course has a rifle, and I love the design of it. Armoured rifles like this, that incorporate and use the colour scheme of the main body, are just my favourite. They look great out of box, being so much more coloured and varied and separated than the standard grey beam rifles. This one having white, grey, out of box a lighter grey for the barrel tips, a gold piece to match the rest of the body, and lighter grey canisters at the back, which are my favourite part. They're just so cool and unique. It's kind of interesting though, they make me think that it would be a beam rifle, I suppose because they remind me of kind of E-packs from the Universal Century and stuff like that. But you can see under the scope that it has the nice exposed detail of the, I don't know gun terminology, so I don't know what to call it. I'll just call it the barrel, even though I know it's not. That looks like it would be where the bullet casings would come out of. So even looking at their own animated footage, I'm not entirely sure what kind of weapon it is. Maybe a mix of a kinetic weapon and energy weapon, like some kind of railgun or plasma gun or something. My only problem with the rifle is that it's a bit small in comparison to the big chunky body. I do like how it is, I just wish that there was ideally another larger, chunkier beam rifle included. There is another gun included, but it's smaller. It does look great though, it's much simpler and less colour separated, but the detail on it is good. I really look forward to painting it and bringing out that detail, and I do actually really like that it is so small. It's really unique for a mobile suit weapon. More like an Uzi or something. You don't ever really see this kind of gun with suits usually. But its main purpose is to be the shield attachment. The shield itself is well done, but I'm not personally a fan of it. I think, again, it's just a bit small, but this time primarily a bit short and a little out of proportion. It's so wide but short and stumpy and doesn't look particularly effective as a shield and how little it would cover the body. That's not unusual for Gundam and mobile suits and everything, of course, but I'm just personally not a fan of it. It just doesn't quite look that good to me. I think I would definitely prefer it if it was longer. And of course, where there's a shield, there must be swords. The beam sabers for this suit are a little reminiscent of 00 beam sabers because they have fairly flat beams. There are also, of course, the hands to hold them. The kit comes with enough pieces to make 2 pairs of hands, and then swappable fingers beyond that. A small detail that's fairly easily missed is that the thumbs are different between the 2 pairs of hands. One are normal and the other's curved out, which suit the trigger finger hand pieces more, I feel like. Putting the swappable finger pieces in is quite difficult. I've personally trimmed the corner of all of them and it's still fairly difficult to get them to go in, but nothing insane, and they are sturdy, unlike the thumbs, which are a bit loose and floppy for my liking. The beam saber handles can be stored in the waist armour. If you're like me when you're first building it, you may have a lot of difficulty with this part, because when telling you to put the beam saber handles into the side skirt frame before putting the armour on top, it shows the handles below the side skirt frame, and so then combined with the groove that the frame has, that can kind of give you the wrong idea, if you're like me at least, and have you trying to fit them into that groove even though that groove is far too short for them. So I kept trying to do that and had the issue of the tab at the bottom for connecting the armour completely getting in the way and colliding with the bottom of the handle and stopping that. The way they're actually supposed to go in is just getting dropped in from the top. I think it would have been a little bit smarter of the instructions to just build the side skirts without the handles inside them and then later on show you being able to put and drop the handles into them. But with something like this, I don't know if it's just me, if it's just how I read it. But I do think it's quite an interesting example of the tiny little things that can affect how someone can read and understand instructions like this, and how careful you would have to be to design them properly and perfectly. The instructions have you build the entire inner frame first before putting any armour onto it, which I'm a fan of. I like inner frames. It's nice to be asked to appreciate all of that detail and stripped down aesthetic, even if only for a little while, and you get to feel the satisfaction of finishing a part and the shape coming together faster. Then, once you have the full body together and have something that could go on a shelf in the meantime, even if inner frames aren't really your cup of tea, and it's a bit plain in colour scheme and in detail in some places. They have done a good job with the inner frame, but really just in some places it's completely flat and smooth and bare. And then, once you're ready to start putting the armour on, doing only the armour lets you appreciate how much simpler and differently enjoyable armour application is. Doing the frame and armour separately allows you to appreciate the differences in individual strengths and weaknesses of assembling those different types of things. The only thing is that it doesn't have you build the complete backpack frame for some reason. The cannon attachment arms are built in the instructions after the armour. So if you do want a full inner frame with the backpack, then you'll have to skip ahead in the instructions and build the extra parts that you need. On the other hand though, it is in a different order to most kits in a good way, in that it has you build the waist before the legs, which is how I'm always saying it should be. That's what I always do. I always skip ahead and build the waist before the legs, because it's something that actually connects to what you've already built, rather than just building a torso, connecting some arms onto it, and then just some legs that have to be off to the side, and then the waist. Not that there's no benefit to building the legs first, but I definitely prefer it this way. The instructions are pretty good though, because they have put the list of runners that you'll need for each subassembly at the start, and not only that, they have also coloured them to match, which helps a lot. The only other improvement would be to just show the runners themselves, or at least somehow show their size in relation to each other, because the runners have been bagged pretty badly. The runners that you need aren't really bagged together. All X runners are for the backpack and cannons and can be set aside while you're building the body, but a lot of body runners are bagged with X runners. And so, combined with there being a lot of runners, finding the one you need, even knowing the colour, can still be a bit of a pain, especially when it is a small, tiny runner and you think it's a big or a normal sized one and stuff like that. It is, however, at least generally the same runners that you're using and carrying on to the next subassembly until you finish those runners, which is really nice and makes a big difference to the build. And it does finish runners regularly, which is good, but also what feels like about half of the time leaves one or two small pieces on a runner that aren't used until much later, which is not good and a pain in the arse. For example, the C runner is one of the first ones that you can finish, but it's left with the two small wrist joints for the hands that you're not told to build until much later. And if you want to go ahead and build those at the time you're finishing the C runner, it's a whole load of other runners that you have to go and find and pull out. Same with N3 and 4. I did go ahead in the instructions and found where they were supposed to go so that I could just finish and bin the N runner and get it out of the way. But it wasn't really worth it in terms of time, because the time it took to go and find the J runner that had the parts that they were supposed to go onto took as long, if not longer, than the time I would have wasted having to keep moving the N runner out of the way and everything. It was a lose-lose pretty much. It also tells you to build the hands 2 separate times. The first time, and then again after doing some of the accessories. And it's strange because it seems like you're supposed to be able to build 4 separate complete hands, but there's only enough parts to build 2 complete hands, and the only spare parts you're left with are more of those wrist joints, because they've doubled up those on a separate X runner, but only the wrist joints. There's none of the other hand parts. It makes me feel like I'm missing a runner or something, but it is still good. At least it means we have extra spare wrist joints in case they break. The wrist joints are just pegs, they're not ball hinges or anything like that are usually prone to breaking on action figures, well, and kits. That type of joint you usually get more so on figures, but you also get it on kits like the Plamatea guts. And it's that kind of joint that's usually prone to breaking and that you usually want a spare of, rather than just a peg. But it's still good in case the clip part ever breaks or anything, or a peg breaks on another kit, you have some spare pegs. The parts on the C runner were fairly tight. I had to sand the pegs on step 2-1, the very start of the chest, which was quite a pain because I was away from home and forgot to bring any sanding tools. I just brought the kit to build on a whim and then was building it and discovered I had to sand. I had to just use the nippers to scrape the plastic a bit. And it reminded me how much of a pain in the arse sanding and tightness is when you just don't have the right tools. I highly recommend getting a glass file if you don't already. It's made a huge difference for me. Other than that, some other pegs were tight, like the knees, but nowhere near as bad, and I mostly got away without sanding anything else. For example, when building it, I thought I would recommend sanding the peg on piece M14, because while I could get it together, it felt like it might be a little too tight for the long term and might stress the peg. But now that it is all together, I'm glad I didn't sand it, the kit is heavy enough that you want the articulation to be sturdy like that chest tilt now is. And so the only other tightness I really want to mention, besides the Sea Runner, is in the feet. The metal soles for the front part of the feet go in very tightly. If you plan to paint, be careful to specifically leave a gap so that you can take it apart again, otherwise you're going to have a hard time. Then the toe joint I also sanded before putting the armour on, as it kept separating and coming apart, but I'm not sure it was necessary. I might have just had it put on incorrectly so that the plastic was colliding and pushing itself apart, and also the armour then goes on top and holds it together. Other than that, it all went together smooth enough. Despite how it may sound, there wasn't actually that many fitment issues. It goes together relatively smoothly overall, without too much sanding or anything required. It's clearly not a Bandai kit, but it also certainly doesn't go together like a bootleg kit. More often than fitment issues, I just had general difficulty. Like, for example, putting the piping on at the back of the cannons was just difficult for about half of them to just get them to line up and go into the centre hole. Or some things that are slight ergonomic issues, like I said about the beam sabers, or the coloured tips for the movable shoulder vents. They're badly laid out on the runner, so I put the wrong piece on one of them, because there's a very similar piece at the bottom of the calves, but they're different thicknesses. The ones on the shoulder are thick, and the ones that go there on the calves are thin, but they're side by side. On the runner it goes thin, thick, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you need 7 and 9 and 8 and 10. So it's quite easy to accidentally, absent-mindedly take the wrong piece, because they look identical, they're just slightly different in thickness. So with everything, the stability of the kit is a little bit mixed. The cannon arms tend to work themselves apart as you articulate them over time. It's then easy enough to just push them back together, of course, but it would be better if they were just all metal and you didn't have to worry about that at all. And then, surprisingly, the feet have also been a major annoyance, because the overlay piece, H1, just keeps coming off all of the time. It hates staying in place. It's a pretty loose connection anyway, and then on top of that, it collides with the sides of the shins and those clear pieces and everything. And so, just about any time you move it in any way that affects the ankles, they will pop off. The back skirts are attached just on pegs, and they're secure, they feel nice, but because it is just pegs and they don't go into a peg hole, it's instead two smaller bands that go over the peg. They have a tendency to work themselves off the peg that little bit and have that first end band come off. It's not a big problem, they're still attached by a lot of peg, but they do work themselves off. The back and front skirt armour has also come off on me a few times when moving everything else about and everything. Incredibly easy to just push back on, but a slight annoyance just the same. Other than that, it is actually good and solid. I know that might sound a bit daft, other than all of those clear, large instabilities, it's stable. But if you're careful with the knees when building them and don't have the same knee issue as me, and then glue on the feet pieces, and then glue the part of the plastic cannon connection that doesn't need to move, and then heat up and make sure the other end is in all of the way so that the cannon arms are no longer an issue, then it's good. Which is why I say it's a mixed bag, because if you just fix those three things, then it's great. But you shouldn't have to fix those three things, and when you don't, it's not just not great, it's bad, including the knees at least, which I'm hoping was just my error. And also the kit comes with a big, sturdy, stable stand. Also because, while there are bits here and there in the frame and construction that you could do with sanding, you don't really have to worry about sanding any nubs, because thankfully all of the kit's armour is undergated, and I didn't notice any mould lines or anything like that either. Parts of the frame are also undergated. I'm not sure if all of them are for displaying the frame as only the frame, and so that it also doesn't have nub marks, but definitely at least some of them are pointless, which is annoying. Like, for example, the magazines have an undergated nub and then normal nub. So what's the point? That's, especially for a magazine, which is two pieces getting sandwiched together, that is the worst of both worlds, because now you have a visible nub mark, and you have a nub that you have to clean up to some degree in order to get them to close together smoothly. And so I'm not sure how much of the undergating throughout the frame parts is similar and how much is actually effective at reducing nubs that are visible when you display it as just a bare frame. Easily the worst part about the nubs though is that they're quite often done in such a way that they look like they're attached to pegs, when actually, no, those pegs are also nubs and you just need to cut those off. For example, the first piece that comes up that does this is the collar, F8, also the N16 neck cover. However, you do quite quickly get used to it, and there are no instances where it is actually a peg that the nub is attached to, so when it is the case you can just cut it off freely, and so it's not really an issue, and the fact that I would call it the worst part about the nubs is honestly a positive, because it's just a little counterintuitive and feels a little scary at first, but there's no real actual risk of error. But do of course double check just to make sure. As much as I've had negative to say about the cannon arms, the articulation is very good though, and it's great and really cool that you can even have them swing round underneath and be used at hand waist level, like the Buster Gundam for example. The arms swivel at the backpack connection, and then that is a hinge. Below that is the top part of the plastic piece, where I recommend gluing it, and then below that is the swivel in the arm that you unfortunately can't completely glue, but I haven't really had an issue with separating. It's usually actually that top piece that isn't supposed to move that has separated for me when I swivel that lower joint. And then below that another hinge, and then another hinge, and then a swivel going into the cannon. And so it is actually really nice that they double hinged it there, even though they didn't really have to, because it does just allow that extra little leeway of movement and positioning that you wouldn't usually get. Especially in the underslung pose, it allows you to position the cannons forward or back, where you would usually be limited in your ability to do that without them also going up and down. Then also on the backpack are the sub-arms, as I mentioned earlier, that are just a whole load of hinges. Unfortunately no swivels on the arm, the only swivel is at the connection into the backpack. But below that swivel they also hinge side to side. The entire backpack is on a hinge. The fins on the sides of the cannons swivel, and so do the canisters and the handlebar at the front, as well of course as the whole opening gimmick that I talked about earlier. The head can move up a little bit if you move the neck forward so that the back of the head doesn't collide with the collar, down a much better amount so that it can bury the chin and look menacing, a good amount of head tilt, and of course side to side. If you want to get it really far to the side you'll have to raise the chin above the collar. The arms can then pull out from the body a bit, and then hinge forward, allowing the arms to come all the way across the chest. A properly, actually impressive range of motion. You can also hinge the arms up at that joint if you want, but the shoulder itself, of course, is a hinge that goes 90 degrees, and then with that one in the body you can get it to go further. As I showed earlier, the top of the shoulders open up, but also the fronts can pull out and hinge down, and also hinge forward in order to theoretically come out of the way of the arm moving forward. In practice, however, it doesn't really add much range because there's still frame underneath that just collides with the arm almost immediately anyway, and I would prefer that the joint just wasn't there and that the shoulders themselves were more solid and I didn't have to keep pushing them closed. The thruster on the end hinges. Arm has bicep swivel, elbows go really far and are well designed. The elbow guard separates and reveals a nice little piston. It's not a full functioning piston, but it looks like one. And that elbow guard, when it separates, doesn't just separate, it also swivels to continue moving in the same direction as the forearm, which is just neat. Then the wrist can swivel, but it also has a hidden forward and back hinge at the end of the forearm. Again, like 00 suits, actually. That armour piece is a little bit annoying for sliding off slightly though. The hand itself is also on a hinge, and then the thumb is articulated but a bit loose. The torso can bend actually really quite far forward at that top joint, and you can see when I put it back after pushing it forward that it has raised up, and you can then just push it back down, but that also means that you can change the height slightly if you want, and also allows it to go back, kind of, because it gets so gappy there in the middle that if I was looking at it from the front anyway, I would never use it. Up there you also get your side to side. It only moves a little bit unfortunately though. You can get a tiny bit more if you do extend the joint, but then it gaps again. Swivel is at the connection into the waist. Side skirts are slightly limiting because they're just on hinges, so you can't move them forward and back. And the lower part of the side skirt is also on a separate hinge for the beam sabers, but that does mean when you're moving the arms and crashing into the side skirts a bit, they can separate. They still look good separated though, so it's not the end of the world. Only the front skirts are on a ball joint and can move in all the ways that a ball joint affords. They then also have sub-arms that only have hinges, just like the backpack ones. The legs can come forward 90 degrees before colliding with the waist skirt armour. They do also have a drop down, but it doesn't help very much. Backwards gets less than 90 degrees, and also has the major issue of the armour catching the waist itself. Because the thighs are only really armoured at the front, the edges of the thigh armour are much more exposed and just keep catching the waist itself. It's especially bad and noticeable when using the thigh swivel. It hasn't stressed the plastic or anything at all. It's not very likely to break the armour or anything, but it's annoying. Inward, there is no range, so if you want to do any like walking poses or anything of the sort, it won't be very easy or natural. Then the knees, while they are a little loose, they are also just awesome. They bend pretty much all the way. There is still a gap there, and extending the knee does lengthen the leg a bit, but just so much moves and gets exposed. It's just great. It's not just a double jointed knee. It seems to be, I think, triple jointed. So you move the very top part and become able to see more of the piping detail on the metal piece, while the armour pulls down and extends and opens a gap between the white and the gold. Then you move down to the next joint and the armour opens up to reveal the plastic frame underneath, and then keep going to reveal the metal underneath that. Those two joints together get the knee to about 90 degrees, and then the last one does the majority of the motion, again revealing the nice frame underneath, and then the metal piece coming out from that, while on the back the calf flap moves down and out. Very cool. The most involved knee I think I've seen. Those calf flaps just kind of wiggle because they move with the knee, they're not really articulated by themselves. Then the thrusters on the sides of the calves have a couple of hinges and are attached into the body on a peg so that they can swivel, allowing all the movement you could want from them. The clear pieces at the sides of the shins can hinge out of the way, but they do get a little bit caught on the armour when you're first starting, and that makes it quite easy to instead pull off the white armour that goes around them rather than actually hinge them out, which is a little frustrating when you're just trying to move the foot. But the foot itself, the whole thing and joint can hinge forward, and then the foot joint itself can move a great amount back and forward, gets excellent ankle pivot, and has two toe joints. The whole toe can move slightly, and then the tip hinges much further. I wish that the whole toe didn't move and it was just the tip. The whole toe it doesn't move enough to add any range or possibilities. It just decreases the stability and makes it so you always have to, last thing after posing it, hold the front and back of the foot and squeeze it together to make sure the heel is actually flat on the ground. It doesn't really add anything and instead just adds an extra step to every pose. So overall, I really like it. While it wasn't without its issues, as I posed it and filmed everything, I got more used to and comfortable with it, and most of all, I just think it looks really good. I always liked the design since they first revealed it years ago now. It just was the colour scheme that I wasn't sure about. And now that even the colour scheme has grown on me, and I've more or less decided how I want to paint it, besides the main colour, I'm really happy with it. It's really cool. The backpack gives so much more options than I realised, and doesn't just have to be a big vertical wall on the back of the mobile suit. You can move it lots to bring the cannons over the shoulders, or underslung them and give it a totally different look when you do that, or just take it off entirely, because the mobile suit looks a lot better than I expected even without any backpack. And I just find it such a unique design with all of those exposed fins everywhere. And so I wonder what Eddas will make next, if anything, because I don't think they still have anything new announced, even though this was announced for years. And because this was announced years ahead of time, I hope whatever they release next won't be the same, considering that they haven't even announced anything else, as far as I'm aware. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Until hopefully next time, bye.